Thank you for being here. My name is Zoe Chanel. I'm the curator at the Rochester Center. This talk is part of a series of conversations among artists, scientists, and healthcare providers, part of the group exhibition Chronicles of the Chronic. This group exhibition celebrates the creativity and resilience of the chronically ill community by featuring regional, national, and international artists whose artistic practice reflects holistically upon the experience of living with a chronic health condition. The show is currently on view until March 31st, and our open hours are Wednesday to Sunday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. We are located in Rochester, Minnesota. The idea of bringing together the medical and artistic world in the context of this exhibition kind of derives from believing that there isn't this binary division between being ill and feeling well. We can, I think, at all times be one or the other, or a mixture of both, actually. As much as medical research and medical care are fundamental for patients, there are also ways to heal and contribute to wellness, and that can be art. Art can help with feeling seen, feeling represented, and kind of eradicating the stigma that has historically been associated with illness. I'm just very grateful today to have this amazing group of people whose work across discipline just really makes a lot of sense to be seen together. I'm here with artist Weng San Sit, postdoctoral research associate Hanna Barton, and doctoral assistant professor Kasey Boehmer. I want to thank the Patient Revolution for making some of this connection of being somewhat involved with that. They've just been a great supporter of the show since, even before it was a thing. Kasey and Hanna, they will share their research and idea around routine and labor and when those things happen within the context of care, self-care, caregiving, caretaking in their different fields. Before I introduce them a little more, I just want to read this passage poem that you can find on Sun's website and relates to the work that is exhibited at the Art Centers. Sun writes, "Routines change. They can be mundane and tedious. They can also be creative and need resourcefulness. Some routines are possible only with the privilege or access. They go way beyond #self-care on Instagram and may in itself be a radical act. Some choose not to have a routine, and the inability to stick to one does not define us, does not warrant guilt or judgment. A routine holds vastly different meanings and form across cultures, class, and lived experiences. Routine might be for our survival, our well-being, structuring our chaotic life. They exist both in our mind or externalized in our physical body. However laborious, highly visible, or invisible, routine insists that we matter." And so I just want to kind of frame our conversation within those words because it's just going to help us bring everything together. We're here, the author of these words is Weng San Sit, who's a Singaporean artist and educator currently based in Los Angeles, utilizing primary still and moving images. Sun's work investigates systems and power structure that create the dissonance between inattentive, homogeneous representation of marginalized body and the reality of complex and multi-faceted identities. Hanna Barton is a human factor and health system engineer with expertise in the field research method, health information technology, evaluation, and human-centered design. They envision and design systems of care that honor individuals' unique life experiences to provide personalized care that addresses people's real needs and desires. A significant contribution of their work thus far has been identifying and describing the home care environment and care works of caregivers, including the strategies caregivers develop to provide effective, safe care in their home. Kasey Boehmer is an assistant professor of health services research and national board certified health and wellness coach. She's a faculty member at the Mayo Clinic Division of Nephrology and Hypertension and the Division of Healthcare Delivery Research. She also serves as a health service researcher in the Knowledge and Evaluation Research and the Rural Health Core in the Center for Clinical and Translation Science at Mayo Clinic. She directs the Minimally Disruptive Medicine program of work at Mayo, and her primary research interests include patient-centered care and communication techniques to understand and support the capacity of patients with multiple chronic conditions and their caregivers. I'm just really excited to be here with those humans today, and I'm gonna let San speak more about the work she's been doing and that it's partially exhibited in the exhibition. So thank you.
So my name is San. As Zoe said, I'm a Singaporean artist. I work in photography and video, and I also teach. And I've been working on a project, Routine as Repertoire, for a few years. I feel like it's still in progress. So I welcome any feedback or any suggestions. Hopefully, at some point, the project could be rounded up. So Routine as Repertoire uses photography and videos to explore routines that women and non-binary folks incorporate into our life as our bodies go through changes, transformation, or challenges. In this project, individuals share diverse routines from taking medication to cleaning of wheelchairs, meditation, exercise, rest, community building, and so on. The kind of embodied changes could include illnesses, disabilities, aging, or pregnancy. This project is exhibited physically, but also we have an online website, and I'm showing clippets of videos and interviews and photos. So these are some video clips that you see on the website. So you can see that the routines could be like playing mahjong to going to physical therapy. So it's a wide range of different kinds of routine. I went in not wanting to put any boundary in what routine means. After my surgery, I went straight into surgical menopause, and I developed lymphedema in my legs. So I thought, I could just simply move on after the surgery, but I was really taken aback by how my body changed. I started developing various routines to care for myself, wrapping my legs, estrogen patches, doctor's appointment, and trying to meditate to learn how to manage the anxiety and loss. So for a while, I was really frustrated, angry, and kind of just, finding like, why am I spending and wasting all this time doing all these? I spent 2 hours like bandaging my legs, like what you see in this photo. As I spoke with others who had gone through embodied changes, many shared their routines with me. So, they could be banal, they could be fun, they could be resourceful, nurturing, etc. And they also shared how they felt. Another thing that quite a common experience was that they felt that to many others, including well-meaning medical practitioners, their identity was often reduced to their conditions. So which is often a result of a very polarized narrative, whether it's tragedy or something heroic. I decided to work on this project because, I guess I was finding a way to deal with all the things I was going through, but also trying to use this project to think about self-care as labor that can be seen through the lens of self-determination. And we also see the individuals in its all complexity. This photo was taken at the end of the project, not at the end, but after I photographed many of these other individuals. I would never have been able to take a photo of myself before that. These people who are part of the project, they share their wisdom with me. They gave me confidence. I want to start off by thanking them. I was inspired by this phrase by Audre Lorde: caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So an act of resistance. And I, with all the things that's happening in the world, very often I feel like, it's kind of frivolous to spend time, taking care of myself. And I feel this sense of guilt. And this is a reminder for me. So this is a short clip that is shown at the art center. So, and this is a clip of, different individuals, kind of taking pills or putting their pills together. Susan Trackman, who lives with MS and is also an artist. She says routines are important because they give me a structure in my life, and they also allow me to have some control over my life and parts of my body I'm not able to control. This project, as you have seen, is a mix of photography and video and interviews. While I was preparing for my classes, photography, like history of photography class, I came upon these images by Frank Gilbreth. In 1910, pioneering management consultant Frank Gilbreth, with his wife Lillian Gilbreth, conducted time motion studies to analyze workers' movement by attaching light globes to their hands and making photographs and videos. The trace motion of the hands in the photograph would then be translated into a physical model for spatial analysis and to train workers to be more efficient. They proposed that this would help to improve workers' condition by reducing fatigue. However, workers and unions resisted the dehumanizing pressure of the relentlessly monitored production line. When I saw this and I think about how do I portray these routines, the time that it takes, but also like the repetition, I reference this image of motion studies. With these images, I was hoping to recontextualize these so-called light paintings, these motion studies, but this time on the terms of the people involved, in the individuals, with autonomy and dignity. So this is Susan Trackman, who lives with MS. She shares her weekly pill loading routine. Eng Chu Eng, who is a 2-time cancer survivor and Tai Chi master, share her routine of face massage, as you can see in the beginning of the slide, and Tai Chi. This work I photographed and filmed both in Singapore and in Los Angeles, and I'm also open to doing it, in different places. So I also make portraits. Vivian Stencil has been blind since age 20 and was told by a doctor that at 50, she may die of complications from being overweight. So she learned how to swim when she was 50. And now at 70, now she's like 73, has won hundreds of medals in various senior games. The light painting and video stills are of her swimming practice. You can see like this is taken, I left home at 4 a.m. and she starts swimming every 3 times a week at 5:30 in the morning.
When I go to a new pool, I swim freestyle and I try to count my laps. Now, if I'm doing the backstroke, it's different, so I slow down. And at the end of the pool, I hear the lane line. And I ask the other swimmers, do they hear that? They don't hear the lane line, but I do. And the lane line go, eek, 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 eek. I can hear underwater where nobody else can hear underwater.
Vivian has superpowers, but also what I really think is the amount of resourcefulness, and creativity that involved while building these routines. Nicole, who lives with rheumatoid arthritis that causes pain in her joints and weaknesses throughout her body, practices yoga at home during the pandemic. So having routine in place helps you to manage your stress and in turn helps to reduce the likelihood of triggering a flare. We also talked a lot about guilt when we are not able to follow our routines. She shared that times where she just didn't want to work on her routine, and that creates a lot of guilt. And I think that's something that is it's also an experience that's quite common. Meditation. For Jacqueline, she would buy flowers. She loved going to the flowers market. And for her, it feels really nurturing to buy flowers for her grandmother. And because her grandmother really supported her throughout her journey. Pika and Wendy, they both had breast cancer and they were kind of sisters. They become like sisters and they decided to work together and they built a community. It's really interesting for me to see how at their kind of this center where they have different children, they incorporate routines that they needed to do into the work, like putting the toys at the top so that they can raise their arm because they have lymphedema on their arms, including like trampoline. So they kind of incorporate things into our lives. Danette Joy Walker is an artist, an advocate who has a unique perspective of being a Black woman experiencing the daily dance with metastasized breast cancer. She uses conventional methods of treatment as well as incorporating complementary holistic practice, such as her daily ritual of making healing tea that her family in Jamaica has been making for generations. Danette taught me a lot because she taught me about how she told her doctors how she would like to be communicated to. Because in the past, I would be like, oh, why did they talk to me like this? And then she's like, no, I go in, I tell them very nicely, I would like to be communicated in a certain way. And they respect it. So this is just a clip of her making tea. Dancing, is a big part of her routine. And of course, she has 2 boys who are like constantly, running around during the whole process. And it was, I went back to make family photos for them, and they're just a really wonderful like family. And this is Evan and his aide Cameron. So in a way, they talked about how these 2 individuals' routine is intertwined. Evan says, I'm hoping to normalize the routines that I and a lot of other people have to create in order to manage their pain and energy, especially because a lot of people don't even think that cerebral palsy even affects these things. In Evan's case, he uses laser pointer to communicate on a letter board. I took a photo of that. In the other photos, I attached, a light source, but this was a light source that Evan had. Often like physical therapy is some of the routines. We know that we are powerful, not despite the complexities of the body, but because of them. And this project, this is the website. And what I'm also hoping to do with the project is to create an archive of different routines. And so I'm also inviting people to submit theirs, because what I realized when I talk to different people is that when they see a routine that is very similar to theirs, they feel really connected. So I felt like, oh, if I have more, then I can almost have like a catalog of them. If you have anything, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, San. I really your work is really inspiring, and there's a lot to learn. And I do myself have arthritis, so it's like, oh, I want to see what other people who have arthritis do for self-care, right? And that routine that might ground them. Yeah, I think your work is like a resource, it's art, it's also like an actual resource for people. So thank you. I think we're going to transition into Hannah's presentation.
So first, I'm just really honored to be here in conversation with San and Kasey. I think Maggie posted in the chat, the convergence is just the coolest part about this. San said, feeling that connection with other people via their routine it's so personal. I'm going to take what might seem like a little jag to the side, which is an engineer's perspective on routine and illness. I do that because I'm an engineer. I have a PhD in industrial and systems engineering from UW-Madison. A couple other things I thought, you might want to know about me in regards to this presentation are that I was raised by a mom with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. I had 3 knee surgeries before I was 19. So that's me. That's little Hannah on the couch after my first surgery. And there I am with my dad on the bottom right, not too long after my surgery when he competed in a Ironman, not his first. He's done a few of them. And I was an athlete. I am an athlete. I'm a retired athlete. Ever since I retired in 2019, I've been trying to redefine or define what health is to me, because for the longest time, since growing up with knee injuries, healthy meant with, even with pain, like I could squat, I could still squat, I could still show up to practice, I could still do the things. That didn't mean I felt well in my body. That didn't mean really much else. this idea of like, what are these routines? It's a fascinating, like, lifelong question for me around my health and all the things that I have chosen to do with my body that have repercussions on it as I live the rest of my life. That's just a little bit about me. But I wanted to start with a little history, which Sans started, and you'll see how it relates back in a moment. Frederick Taylor is considered the father of industrial engineering and was the first one to use time and motion studies to analyze people's work. So he worked in a steel plant. He was trained as a mechanical engineer because there weren't industrial engineers back then. What he did was study the work of the people in his factory and then define systems for how they should do that work. This theory he developed, scientific management or Taylorism, was really pioneering thought that we could find the best way to do a job. And it started a whole world of managers and extra layers in between the people who owned the factory and the people who did the work inside of it. And again, like the point was, okay, we can make these jobs so bite-sized, right, that they're really repetitive, they're small, and they're boring, they're brainless. We can teach anyone to do this. Think like McDonald's job, we can have a teenager make a burger, even though they don't know how to cook, right? Like this is what we can do. You can hear some flaws in how that may apply elsewhere. These two, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, noted they really extended Taylor's work to use these motion studies, pointing to what was considered extra or inefficient movement when people are doing certain tasks. And again, inside of this, like there's still a whole world of lean management where we try to cut out all the excess. My question's always like, how do we define what's excess? How do we define like this is value laden territory? One of the things that's interesting about Lillian in particular is Frank died fairly young and she had a whole career and life after him where she took some of these ideas about how we design work to the home with her perspective, even though she didn't cook herself, with her perspective of being a woman and being expected to cook. So she coined the term circular routing, which then became known as the work triangle. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. When you design a kitchen, a really important part is this idea of how close the stove, the sink, and the fridge are. A really interesting stepping towards studying the work, the real life work. I said about Taylor studying steel workers. Frank was a bricklayer, so a lot of Frank and Lillian's work studied bricklayers. Why are we talking about these people? Well, because when I was invited to be in this conversation, I went to San's website and I saw this. So this is, like she described, this is studying how people do their work physically. Why this is relevant is because Taylorism still exists. This idea that there's a perfect way, there's one right way, or we can improve everyone to be the same way has physical costs. I'm 6'2", and not everyone is 6'2". What is it like to live in a world where things aren't designed to fit someone your size? That has physical costs on my body. When we go to a doctor's appointment and you have to fess up, oh no, I didn't try that thing you told me to try because it just didn't fit in my life. Why is it we feel all this guilt? Well, because there's some idea of how we're supposed to be able to manage our medications or some way that we're supposed to be doing our health. The other reason I'm talking about this is because maybe as San's work demonstrates, there's something beautiful to be recovered here. There's something here in studying people's work that's really human, that's really about what people value, that's really what people really care about. And I saw inside of your art, this is what I feel like I'm doing in applying these industrial engineering techniques to studying the work of patients and their caregivers. Human factors, which is descended from this study of work, but has a, I would say, very different philosophical orientation, which is that really the experience of patients and how they're able to meet their goals, we can actually support that. Instead of designing the job of a bricklayer, we could design the job that supports, or design the technology that supports someone in managing their chronic illness. I just wanted to talk briefly about my dissertation work, and I'll just stay on the slide for a second because what I did was a really exploratory study. So I have like 500 strategies that I identified that families use to take care of their children with complex healthcare needs. So if you have any interest in reading through those, because some of them are very poignant, you're welcome to go to this link. Extending from this patient work conceptualization, what we do as human factors, and what I would say is really integral to human factors, is attention to the system that work happens within. So it's not just individual factors, whether or not you are motivated enough to take your medications. Well, it's about who you are, certainly, but it's about the way your environment is organized. In formal organizations, that's policy, that's culture. In the home, that might be culture that you get from your parents. Your physical environment, how does that constrain you? How does that support you? The tasks that you're doing, like what's the specific healthcare work that you are doing? And then the tools and technology you use. I can think of lots of technology that actively thwarts what I'm trying to do. Most technology, especially our phones, is just trying to grab our attention. Is that supportive of my mental health? Like, probably not. One of the things that as an engineer I'm interested in is what's working what way. So what factors are supporting me reaching the goals that I want? The idea with this model here is that all of these components of the work system are interacting to shape the outcomes that we get. Understanding what's supporting you in reaching your goals or what's in the way is actually really integral to reaching the outcomes that you want. And that I would call system adaptation. In particular, in my study, I was really interested in, well, how do families do that? How do they actually change their system to get what they need, to get what they want? So I defined strategies as any dynamic response to perceived work system barriers or facilitators. And that's one of the pieces that was kind of novel, was mostly we think about a strategy more like a workaround. Something bad happens, how are you going to deal with it? Versus maybe someone sees something that's working and they leverage that in order to achieve their goals. There's a lot of strategies in that document if you'd like to read them. Again, I think they're really moving. One of them I'll say is, one parent describes that when they change their child's trait, so that's their breathing tube, they actually have to take it out, clean the site, and then put it back in. What they do is they hold their breath in order to experience themselves the time pressure of doing that cleaning on their child, imagining that that's how you manage your child's health. We don't talk. Do you talk about that when you go to the doctor? Like, I don't know who's getting are they getting support around that? I don't know. I don't think so. With this study, it was like, what are people doing? They're developing a lot of strategies, and particularly what came through in the data was that it was really important to understand what they were trying to accomplish, what parents are really trying to get at, because people have different desires about their work. Maybe they want it to be more efficient, but maybe they just want it to fit in their life better. Maybe they just want to be able to move their child more easily between this room and that room, and that's why they're redesigning something. And then in particular, like I said, we found that it's people seeing something that they could leverage was actually a really important part, or was like half of all of the strategies that we identified. What does all this mean? Well, it means that caregivers can be proactive. We are creating, or can be creating, well-being through these routines that we develop. If we can support people to see what's working in their environment or what tools they have at their disposal, and maybe also what's in the way, both as a way to either remove it or just be present to that they can't control that piece, then we can give people a way to interact with and shape the care of their child, in this case, themselves. I do research as a way to give fodder to improving people's lives, centering the experiences and the expertise of these families. Who are we to say that there's a right way for someone to be providing care for their child in their unique home environment? There's a whole world there of what are these values we're placing on people. If we backed up a little bit and got up and under the goals of caregivers or patients themselves, we could really support them better. I'll leave it there. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Hannah. I think we're like, yeah, this conversation just makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting to see that, you know, what in art we would call maybe like storytelling, right? Plays a big role in like data collection for a more like STEM field, right? So I'm just like, you know, really, really excited about conversation that we're having, and we're gonna have more. I'll leave the floor to Kasey.
So I'm super grateful for this opportunity. Zoe also gave me the opportunity to walk with her through the exhibit at the Art Center, which I thought was so in alignment with the work that I and my team do at the Knowledge and Evaluation Research Unit. And so I'm going to talk, I think it's kind of the theme. Routine is work. So the work of being a patient, and what does that entail? Specifically, the work that I look at is the work of chronic illness. And I'm in the healthcare setting, of course, so we really love our definition. The definition I like to use for chronic illness is one that lasts 12 months or longer. It either places limitations on self-care, independent living, or social interaction, and/or it results in the need for ongoing intervention with medical products, services, and special equipment. Another thing that Zoe and I had talked about as we were walking through the exhibit was the misconception, I think, that living with chronic illness is something that happens to people who are past working age. They're considered elderly, and that really isn't true. If we look at the segment of our population that's really in their working years prime, from age 25 to what we would consider pre-retirement of 64, there's a wide swath of our population here that are living with these chronic illnesses. This is a common phenomenon people are dealing with every day. I also want to share a little bit about the intersection of my work with my own story of living with chronic illness. I think the reason for doing this is very much like San said, that this is an act of bravery and an act of defiance in many ways. There are many academics living with chronic illness. It's not always been okay to talk about. And there are still students that I work with that face discrimination because of things about their body they cannot control. I've been chronically ill my whole life. Before age 7, I had been diagnosed with 3 chronic illnesses. But as you can imagine, thinking about Hannah's work, most of the work of managing those chronic illnesses fell to my parents. It very much felt routinized to me, and as I came into adulthood, continued to really not feel the impact of those illnesses because I had a supportive family structure to help manage them. However, in 2016, I was in the second semester of my PhD journey, and I developed pelvic pain to the point I could no longer stand up. I couldn't care for my then 3-year-old son or do my schoolwork or any of my employed work, and I was hospitalized and eventually was diagnosed with a condition called interstitial cystitis, which is a chronic inflammatory painful bladder condition that has no cure. I began the journey of finding routine in this new chronic illness, which I think Zoe has, there's an exhibit at the Art Center that shows sort of the bedside table, and this was the couch side table with my water bottle for medication taking and my medicines. I had to give up caffeine at one point for about 6 months during becoming stable with this condition, which I really love caffeine. So that, in my opinion, was probably one of the worst parts. I was very lucky, I feel like, because I was in this incredible surrounded space by people who were willing to help me that I still graduated with my PhD on time, but still managing behind the scenes at that time for chronic illness. In July of 2021, by this time, my second son was about to turn a year old. I started experiencing a whole host of new symptoms, one of which being chronic conjunctivitis, despite nobody else having infectious conjunctivitis in my house. I was eventually diagnosed with Sjogren's syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease that attacks your moisture-producing gland in your body. At some point, I was cool enough to wear sunglasses in my house because the light sensitivity caused by that was really funny. And then this journey continues because in September of 2022, I was diagnosed with mixed connective tissue disease, which is a nice combination of a few autoimmune diseases. And one of the things I think that's the hardest part about living with these invisible illnesses is people think you don't look sick. And then in this picture, I have one of my rashes and 102-degree fever. But if someone saw me coming into the doctor's office, they might not think I look particularly sick. That's my own story. The work that I do is studying how these aspects of managing a life with chronic illness affects people's everyday lives. Myself, and I think every patient I've ever met, they don't have a goal of being a good patient. They want to pursue their life's hopes and dreams. I think in order for us to help people do that, we have to better understand that work and how it manifests in people's lives. I'll walk you through this slide because there's a lot of things happening on it. The crux of the work I do looks at the work that patients do to manage their chronic illness. So taking those medications and things we'll talk about a little bit further. That work is balanced with a person's capacity to take that work on. Just like any other situation where when you feel overwhelmed, whether that's through scarcity in your environment or the fact that you're sick, even if you aren't chronically ill, you can imagine when you're acutely ill, you don't have the capacity to do your everyday life activities. For patients with chronic illness, this workload capacity imbalance affects their ability to access and use care and enact self-care in their everyday lives, which we know in turn affects their outcomes. The big challenge on the side of healthcare that I work in clinics is that our electronic health record doesn't give us an alert that says someone's overwhelmed. They have too much workload for their capacity. What we see is a worsening laboratory value. Naturally, the helpers in medicine want to come to help and think that oftentimes increasing treatment or intensifying treatment is the right answer. But that actually, if a person is overwhelmed, increases this burden of treatment while they continue to feel worse. And this becomes a really vicious cycle. Zooming in on the work of being a patient, this is a theoretical framework called the normalization process theory, which I think is very well illustrated both in San's work and Hanna's work. It breaks down the work of being a patient into 4 parts. Sense-making work, trying to understand a new diagnosis, a new treatment. What does this mean? How can I fit this in my life? So they get a lot of information as a patient. That information doesn't tell me how to make that fit. So then there's the work of organizing those routines, enrolling others to support them, which again, we saw in some of those videos, and then the doing the work. Those routines have to happen every single day, every single week, and you don't get a break. As much as you may hate it or you may want to revolt against it, you don't get a break. And then you have to reflect and monitor, do I need to change that routine? Is this working? Am I really in a flare and I can't make this happen? All of this work is ongoing and continuous. Now, when this work becomes overwhelming, when that workload exceeds capacity, patients experience treatment burden. This is really when that becomes completely unsupported or not adequately supportive or is not meaningful in that person's life. Our team has done research on what exactly can we quantify the work of being a patient. This is another look at someone's routine. We worked with patients who were living with diabetes. We would text message them and say, hey, in the last 3 hours, have you done something to care for your health? When they said yes, then they were prompted to answer some additional questions. What we found was that in those 3-hour time blocks, 9 minutes were spent on managing medication, 5 minutes on monitoring, 30 minutes on health activities such as these routines of exercising or finding healthy food. Shocking is that 40%, so almost half of patients, report that they have unsustainable treatment burden. If they had to maintain the routines that they were being asked to do by their healthcare team, they actually could not do that in a sustained fashion. My passion really falls into, well, if this is overwhelming, how do we support people's capacity so that they can manage this work that is required and still have capacity left over to do what they want to do in their lives? The theory of patient capacity that I authored with our team, it has 4 components. The first is the biography. Chronic illness comes along and it disrupts your sense of biography, your sense of self, and your sense of social roles with others. Some patients move through the process of reframing that biography. I kind of heard that in Sen's story about learning from others to take ownership of the wrapping of the legs or the routines that she was engaging in. That reframing can happen. And for some people, that reframing is very difficult. They get stuck in that space. The other components are the resources that people have available to them. So this could be finances or transportation, the environment in which they are living within, the realization of that work. Oftentimes in healthcare, we give patients a set of new routines in a big book or a big printout that may be 20 pages long. And it's extremely overwhelming. Whereas if we can give that work in such a way that it's small enough pieces that people can actually accomplish that, this can build people's capacity and self-efficacy to do more. And finally, people's social networks to support them in the management of these healthcare routines. So I want to close just with a little snippet on capacity coaching, which is coaching practice that is based on the evidence base of health and wellness coaching, which I'm very passionate about, and it is specifically designed for people living with complex chronic illnesses. It is a strengths-based approach in which we really try to take a picture of what is everything going on in your life and your healthcare. How do we take what's working and build upon that? Also work within our healthcare teams to reduce treatment burden, to make visible the work that patients are doing and find better ways to make care fit. We actually think about what is the dream, what is the goal, what are we trying to accomplish, much like Hanna was saying in their work, working backwards from that goal of how do we then design and create those routines in such a way that fit within that person's life. And this is cyclical. We try things out, we examine how might we know that they're working or not working, and then take what's working and then what's not, move away from it, and then start back over from the beginning until people feel like they're supported and they have what they need to manage their care. We're testing this approach with patients who live with chronic kidney disease, as well as dialysis, which is a life-sustaining intervention for people whose kidneys have failed. We have seen in our pilot studies that using an approach like this can reduce, for example, emergency department visits. We're hoping to study this in larger samples and a greater population beyond even just kidney disease. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here, as well as the amazing researchers, patients, collaborators that are behind this work. I just am lucky enough to get to present it as the face of it today, and would welcome you all to learn more about what we do in the care unit at our Care That Fits conference. Registration is not open yet, but it will be soon. And we do also have free registration for patient advocates and caregivers. If you're interested in learning more, you can find out through that website or also via my contact information. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kasey. More things that resonate, even though they're definitely not in the field, my field of like practice, right? Yeah, it seems that like through the work that you're all doing, you can like this concept of care, this sort of like mystery, you know, like this cloud of like what is care, right? It's actual like tools, it's like something tangible, it's a routine, it's things that like can be actually like pinned down and then can be changed if like they don't work anymore, right? So lots of things to think about. I'd like to open it up for Q&A. If any of the people here have questions, feel free to unmute, raise your hand if you know how to do it on Zoom, or drop it in the chat. I'll be happy to read it.
I love the presentation. It was just so interesting to get to see the connections between the three projects. And Hanna, I know that you're in Wisconsin, so I don't know if you've had a chance to get over to Rochester, but I was curious, Kasey, what your experience of going to see the exhibit at Rochester Art Center was, given your research and the work that you've done over the last many years in your own kind of health experiences.
First and foremost, I think the word that comes to mind is very validating, both of my own personal experience, but of what I see working with patients every day. And it really, you know, it makes visible the invisible work, right? I think that's the biggest challenge of living with chronic illness or dealing with it as a caregiver is you can't see it very often and in many cases. And so the art does an amazing job of capturing that invisible and making it something tangible that even somebody who's never experienced chronic illness could go, oh, I understand what you mean by fatigue now. Like I can feel that in my body in a different way.
That's awesome. Yeah. And Hanna, even if you haven't been able to see the whole exhibit, San's work, your work is so beautiful. I just really love it. And just any thoughts you had, Hanna, even I loved how you drew the connection to the early work of Frederick Taylor and just recognizing the similarities from, you know, the two worldviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool to see it repurposed, bringing visible something that is usually invisible, and that I think is what resonated with me also. You know, going through the website and then participating in some of the other events that Zoe and the Art Center have been organizing. It's like it really is an opportunity for people to be seen and experience being seen. You know, that's what I try to do with my research, but art is probably a better mechanism to do that on a broad scale. You know, I like to think I have my niche, which is you do this so that then someone can justify something, right? Like this is why I do it the way I do it. But the fact that the art in what, you know, in one visualization can elicit what it elicits, that is the purpose. And that's what's so cool about the resonance here, is it's like we all have our place in the fight. Right, we all have our place in the movement.
I don't feel like that, I mean, I feel like all of these pieces need to exist. I think, you know, like when I heard, you know, the research by Hanna and Kasey, is like, now it's like, oh, this all makes sense. Like, you know, like the idea that what you are doing is, for Hanna, is like you're you are creating a catalog of strategies. And I just got so much ideas just listening the two of you, you know, in the project.
Well, it's like, I don't know if you consider TikTok art, but like it is a medium that people are sharing so many strategies on right now. And like, I can't manage being on it, right? But I hear about it. I hear about people sharing strategies, and, you know, again, it's like, okay, so there's what I can capture over 30 interviews and a lot of time spent analyzing them. And then there's what can actually be transferred in social media, and what, you know, you might collect when you know, send out that link and invite everyone to share. And so it's there's all sorts of mechanisms in there. We're just so related now. Like we have access to each other.
Yeah, Maggie says travelers to study in different places and arrive at a similar destination. So that just feels like really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to visit the show or attending other programs or just being here tonight. There is a question by Jane. Jane asked, says, this was a fantastic series of presentation. I'm curious how, if at all, trust in self relates to patient work and capacity coaching. Whoever wants to respond to this can take it. But I also feel that trust relates a lot to Weng's work, even though it's not patient work, because one of the so I will just open up the question to everybody. Like, you go into these people homes and you record them doing their routine. That's pretty vulnerable. So yeah, maybe we'll start with San, and then we'll open up to Hanna and Kasey. Sounds good.
I think, like what I mentioned in the beginning, their trust in me sharing their work and sharing what they do, is in all its vulnerability and all these things really supported me to have trust in myself. I think I was made aware of this, through the interaction. So I feel like so often trust in self also connects to the community, the ability, how we are able to support each other by also making aware, about this idea of confidence, and also seeing other people going through something similar.
Briefly, in working with patients, I think that self-trust has a great impact in this area, because as a coach on the coaching side, when I talk to patients, I often tell them things like, you have the ultimate veto power. Even if I make a suggestion, that doesn't mean you have to take it. This is just brainstorming. Or you've gotten all of these instructions from all of these different healthcare, people on your team. What do you make of them? And that is quite radical, I think, because oftentimes we're just pushing information to patients and not really getting that feedback on, what does this mean in your life? How does this fit for you? What's overwhelming? And so I think helping patients along the way through coaching learn to trust themselves, and that they have that power in their own healthcare journey is huge. So thank you for that question. Hanna?
Yeah, I think all I will add is that I think sharing strategies in this way that families did is a certain sort of vulnerability that even the patients that we worked with most closely on our research team, who opt to be there and are engaged with researchers, would say, like, I would never bring this up in a doctor's appointment because people would judge me, right? They'd be like, why do you do it that way? I have a photo. I didn't put it in the presentation, but we have photos from these interviews, and one of them is a family that they built their own bed risers. Any doctor I show that to will freak out. They're like, that is so risky, that's terrifying. But it's like they're trying to save their back, right? Every day they're providing care to their child, right? And so the vulnerability, just like you're saying, Kasey, of like, no, this is how I'm actually doing it, right? We got to work with that, right? And maybe we could try to reach this goal here, but right now, it's like the most impactful advice I ever got when I was dealing around my digestive stuff was, Hanna, it sounds like food is a stressor to you, and what you need to work on right now is eating 3 times a day. And I was like, wait, really? I don't have to do FODMAPs? I don't need to it was Hanna. I don't know, it was just the most practical advice. And then to the trust more broadly. Like, I'm just so moved by people's contribution to this research, but also, the art you were sharing, San. It's just like humanity is so beautiful, and the way that we share and the way that we care for each other is just the most beautiful thing, and it's an honor to study it and to witness. So
Thank you. I think also a few of the people that I spoke to, actually quite a few of them, said something along the line like, I wish when I was first diagnosed, I have this, this support, not just only the diagnosis, but also like, what are the strategies? What are the questions we have to ask? Like how, and I think everyone, they found their community along the way, but they wish that came with the, before the diagnosis.
yeah.
Right. Like this, these questions that Kasey, like, there's like my dream experience, like, I was like, oh, if we can do that, the experience would be so much more nurturing and less frightening.
I want to be mindful of time. We're like 3 minutes beyond, but I would like to conclude just quickly with, in the spirit of like somehow building this sort of like toolbox archive full of resources for each other, for others, right? Which is something that you're all doing in your field, in your way. I was wondering if you feel like sharing a routine that grounds you, something that helps you when you work or when you don't work, just one thing.
Well, for me, swimming, it has been so helpful in so many ways. It helps with my lymphedema. It also like force me to take a break and breathe, so
Is making a cup of tea, especially the first cup of tea in the morning, is a very, it's a necessary, but it's spiritual as well. And I think that was part of the challenge of giving up tea for a while, was that it was both nourishing from caffeine, but I think nourishing for my soul.
I think I would say the same thing, is that I make coffee every morning, and I love coffee, and it's not about the coffee at all. I heat the water, I grind the beans, I pour it in, I stir it, and I have, the ways that I float through that. Sometimes I throw in some dishes, sometimes I, eat some breakfast, but it's like the process is sustaining, which is interesting to me as someone who thrives off of variation as well. It's like, what is the right level of routine that supports me? So that's a great question. I'm going to be pondering that for a while.
Well, we know all contributes to Sans Archive.
How about you, Zoe? Do you have one?
Well, a routine that I have to do an injection of some horrible medicine that's kind of like Humira, and I hate needles. I fucking hate them, and then I have to inject myself. So I watch like some trash TV while I do it. So at least there's an association with like, I'm looking at that and then I'm just like stabbing myself in the leg, that helps more than just being there like, oh my God, I gotta do this, right? So yeah, thanks for asking.
That's amazing.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for staying a few minutes over. Thank you for your generosity and like learning about each other's work and all you do for people, for the community, for people who don't even know a part of the community, but they will be one day. So, like, thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, really awesome.
Thanks, everyone.